Hi, thank you everyone for joining us today for our webinar on increasing funding for housing trust funds in Georgia. I'm Beth Stevens. I am the State and Local Policy Director in the Southeast for Enterprise Community Partners. I want to let you know today that this webinar is being recorded. I am going to provide to you today an introduction to housing trust funds. We're also going to hear from the experts leading the work of several affordable housing funds in our state. And together we're going to explore how we might increase the revenue sources available for housing trust funds in Georgia and how we can make funding for affordable housing and homelessness prevention more sustainable. To give you a little background about Enterprise Community Partners, we are a national nonprofit housing intermediary providing capital for the development and preservation of affordable housing, policy advocacy at all levels of government, and market solutions that increase the supply of affordable housing and address socially and economically disadvantaged individuals and communities. Next slide. Our work involves a coordinated approach. We build and manage communities ourselves in the Mid-Atlantic, and everything that we do is informed by the residents that we serve there. We also support community development organizations on the ground with funding, advisory services, and technical assistance. We aggregate and invest capital for impact in homes and communities, and we advance nonpartisan housing policy at the state, local, and federal levels. We have the largest housing policy team in the United States. Next slide. Our Southeast office is based in Atlanta, but Enterprise's Southeast market includes these other Southeastern states as well. Next slide. So, in today's program, I'm going to talk to you briefly about housing need in Georgia, and then I'm going to go through some of the information that's contained in a paper that we published at the end of last year on how housing trust funds are critical tools for addressing Georgia's housing crisis. So, we will link to that report in the chat so that you can download it as well. Next slide. So, for housing need in Georgia, thank you. Next slide. Enterprise Community Partners Southeast released a Georgia statewide housing needs analysis in February of 2024. This analysis was conducted by the KB Advisory Group. It was commissioned by Enterprise in partnership with Georgia Advancing Communities Together and the Center for Community Progress. And in that analysis, we found that housing production was cut in half from 2010 to 2020 in Georgia, while the population grew here by over 1 million. So in the 2010s, Georgia added over 532,000 new households. However, we produced fewer new residential structures in the 2010s compared to the four preceding decades. This decline in housing unit production in the 2010s represents the lowest level of housing production since before the 1970s. Next slide. This supply gap, exacerbated by factors including high interest rates and cost of construction materials and labor, has driven up home prices and rent dramatically. So from 2010 to 2012, the average price of homes sold statewide more than doubled and rents grew by 60%. Um, in the analysis, it was also found that Georgia needs to build 715,000 new and replacement housing units over the next decade to accommodate for future growth, make up for existing undersupply, and update our existing housing stock. Um, right now, more than a third of Georgia families rent their homes. That's 1.4 million households, and more than 50% are cost burdened, meaning they spend more than 30% of their income on housing expenses. 28% of Georgia renter households are severely cost burdened, spending more than 50% of their household income on housing expenses. In Georgia, homelessness is on the rise as it is nationally. Here in Georgia, it increased 29% between 2018 and 2024. I share all these facts to show that there is a tremendous need for additional affordable housing and homelessness prevention services and programs, and housing trust funds can be an important tool in those efforts. Next slide. So I want to provide some background on housing trust funds and an overview of the national landscape. Housing trust funds are distinct funds established by city, county, and state governments by law or ordinance to support the preservation and production of affordable housing. Housing trust funds can also support services and programs for individuals experiencing homelessness, homeownership initiatives, land acquisition for community land trusts, rental assistance, disaster recovery, and more. Housing trust funds can be specifically designed and targeted to serve the most critical housing needs in each unique community. Housing trust funds are an effective tool for investment in affordable housing. Next slide. So effective, in fact, that we see housing trust funds in nearly every state in the U.S. 48 states and the District of Columbia have created statewide housing trust funds. Several of those specifically address homelessness. City housing trust funds exist in at least 36 states, and county housing trust funds exist in at least 20. There are 791 local housing trust funds in the U.S. at last count. Next slide. So when establishing a housing trust fund, there are some common considerations that I want to walk through. The first is who's going to administer the fund? Is it going to be an existing government agency, or are you going to establish a new or independent authority or board to oversee the trust fund? Um, Much of the legislation that creates a housing trust fund is going to specify uses for those housing trust fund dollars. For example, specifying that a certain percentage of the funds must serve households at or below 30% of the area median income or 50% of the area median income. You can specify that a certain percentage of the funds support homeownership initiatives. Um, uh, Funds can serve specific populations, such as people at risk of or experiencing homelessness. Um, and many of the funds contribute to the repair, rehabilitation, and construction of affordable housing. Um, how are the funds distributed is another important consideration. Is it going to be a competitive application process? Are you going to channel the funds through existing programs, which is what our neighbor South Carolina does? Are you going to create an entitlement to localities based on a formula, which is what our neighboring state of Florida does? And then perhaps the most important consideration is how is it going to be funded? Um, Sometimes housing trust funds are seeded with large one time investments. They can also receive annual appropriations from a general fund. Housing trust funds can also leverage other investments, such as federal funds or philanthropy dollars. They can be repositories for private donations. Um, and as we see across the country and in many localities and states, there's a dedicated source of revenue. So when housing trust funds are supported with a recurring permanent source of revenue, housing trust funds can systemically shift funding for affordable housing from annual budget allocations process to the commitment of dedicated public revenue. This creates the potential for long-term multi-year initiatives. Next slide. Some example sources of dedicated revenue nationwide. Some popular sources are taxes in the form of real estate transfer tax. This is used in Florida, South Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Iowa. Um, a tax on Airbnb hosts is used in Nashville, Tennessee to fund their local housing trust fund. Some housing trust funds use a portion of property taxes. Denver, Colorado does this. Austin, Texas also voted in 2016 to dedicate all tax revenues generated by property previously owned by the city to the city's affordable housing fund. Um, Fees, specifically document recording fees, are a popular source of dedicated revenue. This is used in Indiana, Oregon, Kentucky, among other places. Um, Developer fees can also be used to fund housing trust funds. That is also used in Denver, Colorado. Other possible sources of dedicated revenue are sale of unclaimed property. Arizona has used that to support their state housing trust fund. Interest from certain accounts, for example, real estate escrow or title escrow accounts, have also been used. So when selecting a dedicated source of revenue, it's important to consider whether the source is going to provide enough money to support the initiatives that can make a difference. And some housing trust funds, as we see here, combine more than one source of revenue. Next slide. So now I want to talk about the housing trust fund landscape here in Georgia, some of the housing trust funds that exist here, and the opportunities for increasing funding to those trust funds. Next slide. So Georgia has a state housing trust fund for the homeless. It has operated this fund for more than 3 decades. This trust fund receives annual appropriations from the state budget. Those dollars are used to leverage federal funding. In fact, in 2023, for every $1 that was committed to Georgia programs by our state housing trust fund, $10.52 was leveraged in federal funding. The annual appropriation remained at around $3 million for many years until we've seen some increases in recent years, which I'll talk about in a moment. Our State Housing Trust Fund for the Homeless has opted to support programs that provide emergency shelter, street outreach, rapid rehousing, homelessness prevention. However, our state housing trust fund for the homeless actually has broader legal authority in statute to hold funds without lapsing and also to expend funds for the creation or preservation of housing that is affordable for lower income households and also to support home ownership initiatives if we opted to use our housing trust fund in that way. Next slide. So these are some opportunities for increasing funding for a state level housing trust fund in Georgia. We could dedicate a tax or fee revenue to a state level housing trust fund. This would require authorization from the Georgia General Assembly. We go into more detail in our paper about exactly what that authorization would need to look like from the General Assembly if you're interested in diving deeper. Um, we could also increase our annual allocation to the State Housing Trust Fund for the homeless, which advocates regularly advocate for. Um, our State Housing Trust Fund funding increased to 7.83 million in the FY25 budget. We also saw that same amount contributed to the State Housing Trust Fund for the homeless by the House and Senate in the FY26 budget, plus an additional 2 million one-time funding increase to improve homelessness programs and leverage additional federal grants. The governor has until May 15th to issue line item vetoes of the FY26 budget. There's also an opportunity for a surplus allocation to our State Housing Trust Fund for the homeless. Georgia has more than $11 billion in unobligated surplus. So there's an opportunity to make a large one-time investment from the surplus into our State Housing Trust Fund for the homeless, or to seed another state level housing trust fund. And those dollars can be held without lapsing to be used for you know, these kinds of housing need initiatives for many years to come. Next slide. We also have local housing trust funds in Georgia. So cities and counties in Georgia have the authority to create a local housing trust fund and to annually appropriate existing funding to it. We're going to hear from several of our um, local affordable housing funds today. Um, there's also affordable housing trust fund in the city of Decatur, which we talk about in our paper, in addition to the city of Atlanta, which we'll hear from today, Savannah's affordable housing fund that we'll hear from today, and Macon-Bibb County's affordable housing fund. We are also aware of additional communities in Georgia that have created housing trust funds or are exploring the establishment of a housing trust fund. Next slide. So there are also opportunities to dedicate revenue at the local level to local housing trust funds. Authorization from the Georgia General Assembly, again, would be required for a local government to expend its authority to levy new or additional taxes in order to dedicate those funds to a housing trust fund. And in our paper, we go into a little more detail about um, what that authorization from the General Assembly would need to look like. State legislation that enables cities and counties in Georgia to expand revenue sources available for dedication would give localities more options to fund and advance local housing trust funds. Next slide. So Enterprise has been working with partners, including House ATL, Georgia Act, Center for Community Progress, and Partners for Home, to explore opportunities for local jurisdictions to increase certain taxes or fees and dedicate them to a housing trust fund. We're interested in state enabling legislation that would provide new revenue tools that local jurisdictions like cities or counties could adopt and then commit to a housing trust fund. The legislation would identify specific existing sources of revenue, like a real estate transfer tax, for example, or document recording fee, um, that could be increased. And the legislation could also create new sources of revenue that local jurisdictions could impose to dedicate to a local housing trust fund. We're also interested in exploring opportunities for dedicated revenue at the state level that could be distributed out to local housing trust funds. Next slide. So if your community wants to learn more about housing trust funds or local housing trust funds, or if you are interested in advocating for dedicated revenue for affordable housing, please reach out to me so that we can be sure to include you in future communications or that I can connect with your community. And now I want to introduce our panelists so that we can move into the panel discussion portion of our presentation today. So Martin Fretty has served as director of Savannah's Housing Services Department since 2000. He has helped develop and manage affordable workforce housing and neighborhood revitalization initiatives for the past 40 years. Before joining the city of Savannah, Martin held positions with the city of Macon, Chattanooga Neighborhood Enterprise, Memphis State University, and the city of West Memphis. Martin received a Master of Architecture from McGill University in Montreal with an emphasis on affordable housing and neighborhood development. He received a Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Kentucky. Will Tucker is the Senior Policy Analyst for the City of Atlanta Mayor's Office. In his role within the Office of the Chief Policy Officer, Will researches and develops holistic, evidence based policy interventions to promote housing affordability and housing security for Atlanta residents. Will also oversees his office's legislative work, including stewardship of Atlanta's Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Prior to joining the mayor's office in 2022, Will held roles with the city's Department of City Planning and with Atlanta Beltline Inc. Will holds a master's of city and regional planning from Georgia Tech and a Bachelor of Arts in History from George Washington University. And our third panelist that we'll hear from is Natalie Bouyett. Natalie is the executive director of the Macon-Bibb County Affordable Housing Fund. Natalie previously served as a real estate specialist and land bank authority manager with the city of Columbus, where she reconstituted efficient processes for city and land bank acquisition and sales. Natalie also held prior roles in the nonprofit sector with the Tri-City Latino Association and the Latin American Association in Atlanta. Natalie holds a Master's of Arts in Management of Nonprofit Organizations and a Bachelor of Science from the University of Georgia. So thank you so much to our panelists for joining us today. I'm going to turn it over to Martin Fretty first to tell us about Savannah's Affordable Housing Fund.
Thanks, Beth, and good morning. Savannah, like a lot of cities, relied on money from HUD over the years to basically carry out its housing initiatives. And the money from HUD is great. CDBG and home dollars, absolutely great money and great opportunities to use it. But what we realized a number of years ago that in order to address our problems and our growing problems with housing, we needed to have a local funding source for housing that provided us with a lot more flexibility and certainty perhaps than the HUD dollars do. So we love our HUD money. We want to keep getting it, but we decided we needed to really, if we're going to step up our game, we had to step to the table locally with money. That said, in 2011, City Council created the Savannah Affordable Housing Fund and provided the first allocation of the fund to the fund from the general fund, $150,000 in the 2012 budget. The success that you're going to hear about that I'll just kind of cover here is largely due to the leadership of the 4 different mayors, 4 different councils, and 4 different city managers having their support, and then the business community support and the civic support has been very, very helpful. Our fund is actually administered by a longtime nonprofit. It's been here for 35 years, set up by the city and business community and philanthropic community back in 1989. Starting with $150,000, it doesn't sound like much, but it was just starting the fund at that point with the idea that it would grow. In the 14 years since it was established, there have been $22.3 million of deposits into the fund. 17 million of that has come from the city over the years. The largest contribution being $7 million in 2022. This year, they put in $2.5 million, which is just under 1% of our general fund budget. That also includes $5.3 million from the private sector, private donors, large and small. The Georgia Ports Authority has contributed $1.5 million thus far of a $6 million 8-year commitment. Foundation kicked in $1 million, and a developer kicked in $400,000. So all that money, that $22 million of deposits into the fund, has helped leverage another $108 million for housing initiatives that the fund has helped undertake. The fund has helped in that 14 years, 1,600 plus households improve their housing conditions. We have a broad range of activities that we fund, from home improvement repairs for senior homeowners to down payment assistance for first-time buyers, for development financing for infill construction of single-family houses or rental housing, multifamily and single-family rental housing. We provide assistance to people that are seeking to rent a property but don't have the security deposit, or they're getting behind in their rent. And we've also begun providing assistance and working with homeless providers to actually build housing for the homeless. So just in short, and to wrap it up, I think the key thing for us was setting up the fund, even though it was a small amount of money. Roll the clock forward 10 years. The mayor appointed a 40-member task force. They created the Savannah Affordable Housing Action Plan. It was adopted in 2021, implemented in 2022, and it has really taken off in terms of fundraising for the Savannah Affordable Housing Fund and investment in that fund. The goals of the Housing Action Plan call to grow this fund from what had been $150,000 to over $10 million a year over the next 10 years, or by 2032. And that would generate another 100 million and help 1,500 families a year. In the last 3 years, the first 3 years of the adoption of the action plan, we're exceeding 111% of our goal for housing production. We're at 145% of goal for overall funding for housing, and we're at 213% of the goal for Savannah Affordable Housing Fund contributions. And lastly, while this doesn't directly go into the housing fund, other important resources that we access and use in the city are SPLOST funds for infrastructure, parks, and acquisition and support of affordable housing development. We utilize city surplus property to help bring about that. We're working with the Land Bank Authority to create a property tax exemption program for large-scale apartment developments that need the tax relief to provide affordable housing. And then we're looking at fee waivers and zoning and ordinance changes that can also support in non-monetary ways to the fund, but can help support affordable housing. So I think that's it for me, Beth, for this moment.
Thank you, Martin. Appreciate that. And now I'm going to turn it over to Will Tucker to tell us about Atlanta's Affordable Housing Trust Fund.
Thanks, Beth. Yeah, so similar kind of origin story to Savannah's as Martin laid out. So, 2021, our comprehensive development plan update really called on the city to get creative with coming up with sustainable long-term recurring revenue sources locally that would help us, have really uniquely flexible funding that we could leverage in addition to our federal and state funds. And so the Beloved Community Affordable Housing Trust Fund was created out of that in 2021. It was initially seeded with $21 million from the Gulch, a large redevelopment project in downtown Atlanta. And then we had a phase in over the course of 3 fiscal years, ultimately reaching 2% of the general fund, which is allocated into the trust fund each year. So it's been about $56 million in total deposited to date. And it's given us some incredible flexibility. Prior to the creation of the trust fund, the city had several successful housing bond issuances. I believe 3 for multifamily and single family, and then a dedicated homelessness opportunity bond as well to pair with that. But a lot of that money, because there are bond documents and project lists associated with it, it's kind of tied up. It doesn't let you be as nimble in terms of kind of addressing unanticipated emergencies, et cetera. So I think the most valuable thing about our local housing trust fund has just been that ability to be really nimble, especially as the outlook for federal funding becomes a little more unpredictable. So it's given us opportunities to invest directly in preservation and in new construction. And with those, we target 80% AMI is kind of our maximum on the rental side, and then 120% of area median income for home ownership. But we're really trying to target deeper affordability with the use of these funds. So we try to target 50% AMI for rental and 80% for home ownership. And a large portion of that to date has gone to our rapid housing initiative. So as part of the mayor's goal, Mayor Andre Dickens, of creating and preserving 20,000 units of affordable housing over 9 years, we'd like to, a large portion of that is creating 600 units of deeply affordable permanent supportive housing and pathways out of homelessness. with wraparound services on site. So we've had 3 phases to date. 9 million in total have come from the Housing Trust Fund. And that's also, given us some leverage to support additional bond issuances as well. So we have a second homelessness opportunity bond that's helping us build those 600 units of rapid housing on sites throughout the city. It's also given us a real opportunity to have some nimble funding we can deploy for addressing housing insecurity. So we were able to see the city's first ever housing help center, which is kind of a one-stop shop for all residents, but in particular, targeting 80% AMI, 60% AMI and below, as just not only a clearinghouse for existing resources, both philanthropic, nonprofit, and public, but also just to get a real sense of the landscape, the scale of need. It gives us some sort of policy signals and guidance so that we know where to try to deploy our dollars in the following fiscal year. It's been a really remarkable resource to date. So I'll touch on those. And then lastly, it's given us a real ability to be more aggressive and deliberate with our use of public land, whether it be kind of large city-owned sites that we can, be really strategic about relocating existing city facilities, et cetera, to reposition those sites to be mixed income, mixed use, sort of catalytic projects, even down to the single, sort of scattered site infill perspective when it comes to working really closely with the Metro Atlanta Land Bank to clear title on some of these fractured title places and reposition them to be developed into permanently affordable home ownership opportunities. So I'll stop there and hand it over to Beth.
Thank you, Will. Appreciate that. Now I'm going to turn it over to Natalie to talk about our newest affordable housing fund on our panel, the Macon-Bibb County Affordable Housing Fund.
It's always so fun to go after organizations like Will and Martin that are just so well-oiled, and we're still very much just trying to still gear up our organization. So I've been here for 7 months. Don't nearly have as much history to talk about as Will and Martin, but I certainly have had a lot of interesting experiences trying to start the organization. So our origin it started in 2019 when we were trying to just find some local funding for LIHTC development. Had no idea what we were getting into because we were looking just to about $50,000 of money to seed the organization to support the housing authority. And after 2020, our mayor decided that $7.5 million was more appropriate. So with that, we were successful in creating a project for the housing authority. It's a 64-unit development in a very historically disenfranchised area. We actually ended up taking down an old school that was only in operation for 1, maybe 2 years, just because of mismanagement. And unfortunately, it started to deteriorate so quickly, which is so unfortunate because the building actually looks viable from the outside, but inside it was just completely unusable. And so the optics of the city coming in to take down that school in the middle of this neighborhood was really helped by the fact that now we're proposing a 64 mixed use income affordable housing project with commercial spaces for local minority-owned businesses. So we're really excited about that project, and we've been able to support local nonprofits like the Habitat for Humanity in doing some gap funding for some of their projects. That's going to allow them to increase their capacity for the first time in many years, as they've been often so limited by the timeline for federal funds being drawn down during their projects. So we have we're working on a plan for the next 5 years to really start vamping up their capacity. We are working more with our local homeless shelters and trying to find transitional housing options. And the mayor has really been pushing this initiative, which has caused things to move very quickly, as it does. And we are looking at also forming a development branch of the Affordable Housing Fund, just so that we can also go into these neighborhoods that we're targeting to be even just the first development, so that we can take some of that burden off private developers that are a little more hesitant in taking this huge amount of risk that we're asking. So we're working very closely with our land bank authority as they're identifying vacant properties or dilapidated properties in these neighborhoods that we can either target ourselves or work with local nonprofits, or even have private developers come in to use our funding to do new construction and renovation work. And then on the back end of that, we really want to work with our home buyers. And so we're partnering with nonprofit organizations to do home buyer education and down payment assistance. And I think it was earlier this month, I think it was 2 weeks ago, we finally allocated our first chunk of funding to down payment assistance. So as you can hear, this is all very new, very young, but it is moving along very well. And then lastly, the third thing that we're trying to do is just bring awareness to what affordable housing is. Even affordable housing, just that language has been getting a bad rap in the public. And so we're trying to raise awareness through whatever vocabulary we have to, whether it be, income aligned or, oh my gosh, we have so many others I can't even think right now. And just really help our general public understand that affordability issues are really affecting everyone of every income level. As I'm sure everybody here already knows, almost half of Macon-Bibb County is cost burden, meaning more than 30% of their income is going to housing costs. So it's really helping the public understand why this work is important, and also using that communication to helping these neighborhoods also understand why we're coming in so strongly and doing this development work, so that they feel comfortable seeing their city officials and nonprofit organizations just in their area so often, and what our intentions are. So yeah, I think again, not as in depth as Will and Martin, but I'm very excited in how much progress our organization has made even in the past 7 months.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Natalie. So now we're going to move into the Q&A portion of our program. So the first question we have is, have you had discussions, this is for anyone, have you had discussions about finding additional sources of funding or revenue for your affordable housing fund? And are there any potential sources of additional revenue that you have explored and that seem promising?
Well, this is Martin in Savannah. We're continuing to try and grow the fundraising from the private sector, from businesses, both small and large. Also, again, trying to increase the amount. The action plan actually calls for the city's allocation to increase by $500,000 a year over that 10-year period. So trying to get more businesses aware of what the issues are and how it can benefit them to help support housing. We have a couple hospitals that are participating in an employer assisted home purchase program to benefit their employees, and just trying to help people understand why it's important to be involved. And as Natalie said, this isn't just the very poorest of the poor that are needing housing. It's people in Savannah that make $65,000 and less. And then what we would really love to do is to see if there was some way to change state law to allow for SPLOST funds to be used for privately developed housing in a way we don't think they can currently be used for that purpose. But that's probably a longer kind of challenge.
Thank you, Martin. Will or Natalie, is there anything that you would want to add about additional sources of funding that you've explored for your fund?
Yeah, sure. So in the past, we looked at real estate transfer taxes. We've looked at potential off-street parking tax on structured parking, surface lots, et cetera, in particular to support rapid housing and permanent supportive housing. As Beth mentioned in her introductory slides, there are some challenges there in terms of just seeking authorization from the state legislature. So, kind of looking at local sources. Right now, we're moving through the legislative process on creating a new voluntary affordable housing density bonus citywide in one of our mixed-use zoning categories. And as part of that, we would love to see a combination of both on-site affordable units up to 60 or 80% of area median income, and in cases where construction costs are high enough that it makes more sense to pay an in-lieu fee. Those in-lieu fees we anticipate could collect between $1 and $3 million per project that would go towards affordable housing creation and preservation. So we're excited about that possibility.
Thanks, Will. And Natalie,
Yeah.
I know you all are new, so if there's any discussions you've been a part of in that vein.
We've definitely been looking at other local, the director of our community foundation is on our board, and we've been exploring some local county fund opportunities as well. We are in a kind of a position though, with the federal funds that we are using, they have to be spent by the end of next year. And so we're so focused on trying to make sure this money goes through. That's kind of been where most of our energy has been directed towards, but we have put some effort into exploring like general fund allocations. But I feel like most of those conversations are going to be coming shortly.
Oops, thank you all for sharing. So our next question is, how engaged are community members in planning and implementing the Housing Trust Fund strategies? And I know, Martin, you've spoken about the action plan in Savannah. So I don't know if you want to take a first stab at that one.
Yeah, the housing action plan was developed by a 40-member citizen task force that put together the kind of goals for raising money for the Savannah Affordable Housing Fund and the types of activities it would support. And then it reached out. It was interesting. That was all done during COVID, so everything had to be done like we're doing it now rather than in person. But we were able to survey the community and get their feedback and input. And I mean, the one beautiful thing about the housing fund is it is so flexible that as needs arise, even after we said, okay, well, here's the kinds of things that we're willing to fund. If a need arises and we're aware of it and we think it's a good idea, we have the ability to quickly move on a dime to address those needs. So we've always encouraged and had community participation. Even in our large housing development projects, we've had design charrettes with the community to get their feedback on how a 44-acre site is going to be developed with 5 phases of tax credit housing and ownership and parks and whatnot. So it's all very important to us.
Yeah, in terms of kind of direct oversight, City Council manages use of these funds and authorize allocations each fiscal year. This year, we had 17 million that was split between housing production and addressing housing insecurity. But then we also have the Atlanta Housing Commission, which is an appointed body made up of practitioners and advocates who meet monthly. And they kind of hold us to account, right? So we talk every month and kind of keep them apprised of what's going on, what's working, what's not. And then on the sort of direct community engagement front, I think we've tried to be really deliberate and intentional with on our public land sites. So we did use our Housing Trust Fund to spin up and seed the Atlanta Urban Development Corporation, which is a subsidiary of Atlanta Housing, of our PHA. And so they really pride themselves on doing really deliberate, long-term, deep community engagement on each of our procurements. There have been 3 to date. And I think we've built a lot of trust and credibility. And as those projects, once they start to, you see shovels in the dirt and you see the finished products, I think that's going to continue to improve and be a good model for us to use in our other public agencies.
Yeah, Yeah, and then in terms of our board, excuse me, the mayor is actually a member of our board with 3 other appointees from the city. And we just find that this just helps our workflow a lot more smoothly, as well as we're all clearly communicating with each other at the city level. And then more locally, during our application review process, whenever we see applications in areas that we know have organized neighborhoods or any kind of organized body, we do ask that they speak or that we all meet to have a discussion, just so everyone's on the same page, or that they can give some feedback into our developments in that area. And kind of what Will is saying, just like the nature of the work, just, trying to make sure, like, when the shovels go into the ground to when you lay your last brick, like, you're communicating and helping them understand this, how it's going to benefit that community in the long run. So just, again, clear communication throughout and trying to really spell out what affordable housing does benefit-wise for just the entire community.
Thank you all. So for our next question, what would you be able to do with additional funding that you're not able to do now? Are there ideas or goals that you have for future work that you'd love to have additional funding to see accomplished?
I mean, from our perspective, just being able to increase production across all those different items that we're funding would be is necessary, needed, and certainly would be helpful. I think the one area and the area where it's most costly for us is to provide housing for persons exiting or experiencing homelessness. There's very little bank financing that can be brought to the table in those cases. So if we had more money for what we're for the fund and we're able to allocate more to the construction of housing for persons experiencing homelessness and a whole range of housing. We've done tiny homes that are 128 square feet. We've done apartments, single family houses. We're doing a renovation of a 4-unit row house for medically fragile homeless persons that haven't got anywhere to go once the hospital's ready to release them. So just trying to provide more options and more opportunities for persons that are, again, not totally destitute, but are a part of our homeless population, which is of concern to all of us here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, to echo Martin's thoughts, those folks who are kind of between benefits or fall through the gaps, they're not yet necessarily eligible to kind of enter our continuum of care because they're not homeless enough, but they still are sleeping in their cars at night. And that I think is a part of the continuum that we would really like to continue to target and have more resources for. In the past couple of years, we've done 2 rounds of eviction diversion funding at $4 million total, which is great. And it's helped a lot of households across the city and a broad kind of cross section of just the Atlanta community. But at the end of the day, I mean, that money's gone just to get them out of arrears. And what does the future necessarily look like? So I think being much more aggressive about public land acquisition, especially in advance of some large infrastructure projects and public investments that we know are going to stimulate some long distressed and kind of overlooked communities, and just getting ahead of the curve in terms of anti-displacement work and anti-gentrification, I think is something that we would like to continue to do.
Yeah, and I think I think Martin, y'all are already doing this, but something that I would love to consider, especially the feedback I receive from a lot of the neighborhood associations we go talk to, is having funding for owner renovations. We're going into these neighborhoods and investing a lot of money in anywhere between 50 to 100 lots and acquisitions and identifying developers, and it would really be nice to help the people that are already there. So we don't currently have a program like that, but it would certainly be nice for that to be one down the line a little later.
That's great. Thank you all. So another question that came from our audience is, how can a local nonprofit agency seeking to build or offer affordable housing partner with either of your agencies or funds?
We're open to nonprofits or for-profits, anybody that has an idea about what they would like to try and do and accomplish. If it doesn't fit neatly into the box of the programs that we have, but we think it's a good idea, just sitting down with them and having a conversation to see what their goals are, what they're trying to bring to what they're bringing to the table, what they would need from us, and just finding if there's a way to partner. And I mean, the city doesn't build any of this housing that we are involved with or renovate it. It's all done through partnerships, either with the private sector or with nonprofits. I guess the first thing I would say to anybody interested in doing something in Savannah is just give us a call, tell us what your idea is, and let's see if we can figure out a way to work together. And the nice thing about the fund again is that provided we've got the money, there's a lot of flexibility to try to help projects that make sense that may not, be a part of the standard kind of menu of things.
Yeah, typically, we try to capitalize on our skills at the city and then understand where we're not necessarily the best suited. So typically we have Invest Atlanta, our local development agency, kind of handle procurement on a project by project basis, right? So 4.5 million went out the door to support a faith-based development initiative, as well as a missing middle housing program that's really targeted towards nonprofit and smaller local developers. So we work with them to just make sure that we're getting the word out and that folks can find those resources. But for anything along those lines, I would certainly just direct you to Invest Atlanta's website.
And for Macon-Bibb County, the Affordable Housing Fund, oftentimes the initial conversations are sitting down with me, and if you're interested in acquiring land as well, the Land Bank Authority, and just figuring out if your project is in line with our mission of affordable housing, in which I don't think I said, but we are serving 120% of our area median income and lower. So making sure that your development work is within our requirements. And if it is, and even more technical assistance is needed, because I mean, it's the paperwork that you have to fill out when you get a loan at any other bank. We do partner with a small business development center who is aware of our process and can really help with our applications as well.
Thank you all. We got another question. Would any of your funds be able to support a nonprofit organization doing transitional housing? I don't know if any of you can.
Yeah, like I say, we're working with homeless service providers that provide a number of different housing options, and certainly transitional housing is one. We do like to try and wherever possible get permanent supportive housing where you've got support services to go with the housing, but under the Housing First model and stuff like that, there's a whole range of different activities that we would be willing to listen to a proposal and see if we could figure out a way to make it work if it made sense for both parties.
Yeah, we work closely with Partners for Home, who leads the Atlanta Continuum of Care. So they've got their hands on a lot of what we're doing on the rapid housing side when it comes to creating permanently affordable supportive housing. But they also have rapid housing programs, and certainly they're kind of our single point of communication and coordination when it comes to all of their subs, including local nonprofits. So we try to keep that kind of centralized, but I would just say, yeah, going through Partners for Home for us.
And probably more in line with Martin, yes, we work with nonprofit organizations. We're considering our first transitional housing project with the local nonprofit, the Housing Initiative. And we're of course we're going to need a huge infusement of grant money to make up the gap that we're having with the financing portion. But I mean, we're figuring out a way to make it work, and so that conversation is always worth having.
All right, thank you all. That was our last question. So we will move into closing. I want to say I'm so grateful to our panelists. Thank you all for joining us today and for having this conversation. Thank you to our attendees for tuning in. And as I mentioned, this will be recorded, and we will make a recording available after the event. And I will reiterate, if your community wants to learn more about affordable housing fund or is interested in creating an affordable housing fund, we'd love to talk with you. And if you're interested in advocating as an individual or an organization for dedicated revenue for affordable housing funds or housing trust funds in Georgia, um, please connect with me and let us know. That's our website there. Thank you all for attending, and I hope you have a great remainder of the week. Thank you.